Hello, Kimmer Hashiv. Welcome back. Today we're going to have a look at painting the main figure from this zombie diorama. I got this model from Hassle Free Miniatures. Now they call her Susie, but I've changed the name to Zaya because that's how I roll. I wanted to paint her up fairly quickly, so I made some concessions on the process and made a conscious effort not to strive for perfection. Instead, my aim was to paint something I was happy with and not get too caught up in one of those never-ending spirals of refining things. We'll begin by painting the face. Now, this model honestly doesn't have great features. Kev White is easily one of my favourite sculptors, but he can occasionally phone it in on the face, and I think this model was one of those times. You can see it's a bit derpy looking, however we'll try our best to add some character to it all the same. We'll be painting from dark to light, so we'll start off making a shadow tone for our base coat. To do that we'll initially take a standard flesh colour. So this one is Talar Flesh from the old Games Workshop line, but any similar colour will work just as well. Next we'll add some of this Chimera Magenta, both to darken it and also warm it up. Again, you don't have to use this specific paint, any dark pink or magenta is going to work just fine. So now we have a pretty decent fleshy pink tone which we'll use as our mid-tone. To turn that into a shadow colour, we're going to take a dollop of it and just add in a touch of Chimera Phthalo Blue. This is a very dark blue, so we don't need very much to make a big difference. You can see this gives us a good desaturated but not muddy purpley flesh tone. And we'll paint that over all the exposed skin on the miniature, which should look something like this. I applied this over a couple of thin coats to ensure I got a nice even coverage with a consistent finish. For our first highlight layer, we'll take some of this pinky colour we just mixed and we'll dilute it down to a layer consistency. So a little transparent, but not so transparent yet you'd want to use it as a glaze. Now we're going to pull that over the features of the face towards where we want the highlights to be the most intense. You can see I've already applied a layer of this. I think I lost a bit of footage, so I'm sorry about that, but the process for the second layer is just the same as the first, so you're not really missing much. You can see I'm essentially drawing the brush up and over the forehead towards the hairline. I do this over a few brush strokes, so this allows me to leave more paint in the area where I want to build up the highlight, while creating a subtle transition as we move towards that point. This works because you're always going to leave more paint at the end of your brush stroke, so because the paint is slightly transparent, your base layer is always going to partially show through underneath the area where you start your stroke, but it will become less and less apparent as you reach the end, as that's where more paint is going to end up. And by doing this over a number of layers, you ensure you get a nice solid colour at the highlight, while retaining that subtle gradient as you transition into it. We'll also do this on the cheeks, pulling the paint up over the side of the face, ending our brushstroke just underneath the eyes. When you're painting faces, try and think about bringing out the details in the middle of the face. So the forehead, the top of the cheeks, the bridge of the nose, the middle of the upper lip, and the chin. You can see I'm sweeping the brush up from either side here to leave more of the paint in the middle area. When you're doing this, don't be scared to use more than one brush stroke. Just don't go crazy with it. I usually don't do more than about 3 before stopping. Any more than that and I think you run the risk of overworking it or leaving too much paint on the surface. Before we go any further with the highlights, I think we'll block in the eyes. The face on this is very small, so it's a good idea to get them out of the way just in case we mess them up. For that we're going to make a very dark blue tone by mixing a small amount of black into some of this Chimera Phthalo Blue. Careful you don't add too much, the blue is already quite dark, so you do run the risk of it just looking black, and that's not really what we're going for here. Alright, so we'll take that and carefully paint in the eye sockets. That initial highlight we put in should actually make it a bit easier to see where the eyes are. It's quite difficult to do this cleanly on this scale, so just try and take your time. Use a gentle touch and paint with the tip of the brush. Also, don't try and paint the whole thing in one go. You can see I'm only painting a little bit at a time. So I'll paint a little bit and then have a look at what I've done, and then I'll go back in and paint a bit more. And if I make a mistake, I just quickly switch to a second brush and use that to try and correct the edge where I've gone over the lines. Rather than wiping the paint off the surface, you can instead use the brush to guide it back into where you meant to put it in the first place. Just place the tip of the brush into the paint and push it over the surface back towards the eye. Then you can quickly clean it off and come back with a damp brush and just lightly wipe away the surface where you've left any little stains. I'll just try to correct the shape a bit more, they're still a bit wonky. It's quite awkward to do this, especially on this model, because the way the hair is overhanging the face is making it quite difficult to get the brush into the socket and also to make it stay in frame. You can probably see it a bit better from this angle. I'm just trying to get it so it's a decent eye shape and that they match on each side. Yeah, I think that'll be alright now. Once we get the eyeball painted, it should look pretty decent. Now the highlight on the forehead here is a little rough on the bottom edge, but we can soften that out by taking our highlight colour and just applying some stippling. Gently tapping the tip of the brush on the surface as we move across the lower edge of the highlight, leaving behind lots of small dots. And in that way we can make the transition less abrupt. If you're new to stippling, it's a fairly simple concept, but it affords you a lot of flexibility. The basic idea is that you gently and repeatedly tap the tip of the brush against the surface, moving the brush around the general area, each tap leaving behind a small dot of paint. And by using a consistency that has a certain level of transparency to it, you're able to control the opacity or coverage. Adding more dots in the same area will reduce the transparency of the paint. Thus, you can decide where to make your colours more or less intense, simply by how many dots you apply in any given position. This is going to allow you to create a blend by making your dots become more sparse and spread out as you move away from the highlight. I'm pretty happy with that, so I think we can make a start on building up the highlights. As our skin tone colours are quite warm, to get more contrast we'll introduce a cold tone to build the highlights. To do that I'm going to take some of this white sands and into that we'll mix just a small amount of the Caribbean blue, and that's going to give us this really light turquoise. Then to create our highlight we'll simply take some of that paint and mix it into our fleshy pink mid-tone, making it a bit brighter. We'll paint that onto the areas where we want to create our highlights, so on top of the forehead here, just where the face meets the hairline. Try to cover about half the size of your initial layer. You always want to be conscious of retaining part of each layer so that you end up with a gradient into your highlights rather than just a single solid colour. We'll also place some of the paint into the middle of the upper lip and then at the top of each cheek just under the eyes. You're also going to want to paint along the bridge of the nose to bring that detail forward, and I use the side of the brush here for that as it makes it a lot easier. And we'll add a highlight to the front of the chin too. These smaller elements you really want to think about just using the side of the brush, much like when you're painting an edge highlight, as it's going to make things much more simple for you. So if we add another layer of that under the eyes here, you can see that the highlights suddenly look a lot brighter than they were before. Always remember that acrylics have a transparent quality to them, so you're usually going to need more than one layer to get a solid coverage. I think a lot of issues in miniature painting just come from being in a rush to get to the next step. People tend to stop too early and end up with too much of the previous layers showing through underneath, and that can leave you with quite a dull or muddy effect. And it's the same idea here on these other points. I'm just adding a second layer to make sure the colour is as bright as it should be. To continue, we're going to take our mix and dilute it down to a thickish glaze consistency with a bit of water. Then, with a very small amount on the brush, we'll begin to blend out the edges just by gently pulling the brush up and over the edge, smoothly moving the brush towards the highlight. For larger areas, you can employ a bit of stippling, using the tip of your brush to apply little dots on and around the trailing edge of the highlight. This is going to add some subtle surface texture while also softening out the hard line between the two colours. Try not to overwork any area, so you don't want to build up stains or any physical texture, so be sure to leave time to let your layers dry. You can use a hairdryer or simply blow on the model with your mouth between layers. That will help speed up the drying time. When you're working on such a small area, even a single dot can make quite a significant difference, so it's good to take your time and evaluate what's happening as you're painting. It's pretty easy to get carried away and just slap the paint around and then wonder why it looks a mess. So don't be scared to slow down and really try to look at what you're doing. Think about what you like about the paint job and what you're not happy with. That will help you to focus on the areas you need to improve on and to stop fussing about the parts that are actually working. It's all too common to keep working on an area that's already fine and then just keep going and going until you completely mess it up, all the time ignoring all the other areas which actually do need your attention, so try not to fall into that trap. Next we'll add a bit more of that light turquoise into the mix to brighten the highlight. Then we'll go back and apply another layer in the same spots as before, but this time making them about half the size as the previous one. So on the forehead, the bridge of the nose towards the tip, the top of the cheeks, under the eyes, and the middle of the upper lip and chin. Again, I'll do this over a couple of layers to ensure the paint is nice and bright. With those in place, we're going to take some of the highlight colour and just like we did before, we'll thin it down slightly with some water to a thickish glaze consistency. Then with hardly any of that on the brush, we'll gently sweep the bristles up and over the edge of the highlights, moving the brush in the direction of the highlight. Doing this over several layers, letting each one dry until we soften out any hard edges between the colours. You can see we're starting to get more definition to the features of the face now. It looks a bit off without the eyes painted in, but we'll get to that later. Again, in the larger areas like the forehead or cheeks, you can employ a little bit of stippling to add some texture if you like, but it's not necessary, especially on this scale. I think that's starting to look okay now, so we'll have a go at painting in the rest of the eyes. You never want to use white for eyeballs, it's always going to look way too bright. You're much better off mixing a light colour instead. So here we'll do just that by first taking some white sands, then adding a very small amount of magenta and a small amount of the phthalo blue, giving us this light lilac colour. It's probably not going to look light enough on your palette, but remember that it's going to be surrounded by that very dark blue that we painted earlier, so it's going to appear a lot brighter once it's on the model. Now, as carefully as I can, I'm going to paint in the eyeballs. Again, like I mentioned earlier, when you're painting these tiny details, don't feel that you need to paint them in one shot. You can take your time and paint them bit by bit until you're happy with the shape. The main thing is that you want to retain a dark line around the outside of the eyeball. If the paint starts to dry in the brush, just reload and try again. The hair on the model makes painting them in from this angle really difficult as it sort of pushes the brush to the side slightly. So I'll swing the mini around to attack it from the other side. You can see I'm doing this really slowly to try and keep things as neat as I can. So I think that's going to be okay. I'll paint the other one in off cam just to preserve my sanity. So it's just the same thing, but be careful that you get it looking roughly the same size and shape. I want her to have quite a fierce look, so I'll grab some of this magenta and we'll use that to paint the irises. Giving her reddish eyes should help to give us that sense of rage coming through. Make sure the brush has a sharp tip and very gently and carefully paint a small blob onto the eye, and it's really up to you in what direction you want her to be looking. So I'm putting mine right in the centre to give her like a wild starey vibe. Usually you don't want to do that, but I think in this context it's going to work quite well. You're really just tapping the tip of the brush onto the eye, which is easier said than done, so just try and keep your hands as steady as you can and go as slowly as you need to. The last feature we need to pick out are the lips. We'll first create a dark colour by mixing some of the phthalo blue into some magenta to get a dark violet. Then we'll paint that over the whole lip and the mouth area as well. This is going to essentially create an outline for the mouth, much like we did for the eyes with the dark blue. Be sure to keep a clean brush on hand just in case you make a mistake and need to wipe any paint back off the surface. And at the risk of repeating myself, you don't need to paint the whole thing at once. Keeping things neat at this scale is quite a challenge, so there's no shame in painting a small section at a time until you've filled in the whole detail. Alright, so I think that looks okay. To paint the actual lip, we'll first take some of the magenta and lighten it slightly by mixing in some of the white sands, giving us a more obvious pink colour. And we're going to use that to paint in the bottom lip, taking care to leave that dark outline around the outside. You'll probably need to do this over a couple of layers to get the colour nice and vibrant. You could leave it there if you wanted, but I think it's a good idea to apply a little highlight. So we'll mix some more white sands into the pink to make it quite bright. And we'll go back and apply a small highlight around the middle of the lip, like so. Again, you could leave it there, or you could add a bit more white sands into the mix, making it a bit brighter still, and use that to apply another tiny highlight into the very centre of the lip. Applying this as a tiny dot, just gently tapping the lip with the tip of the brush. As a finishing touch, we'll thin down some of the magenta with a little water to a glaze consistency, and we'll use that to add a bit of extra colour to the cheeks. So we're going to have a very small amount of that on the brush and just gently pull the bristles down over the side of the cheek. And if you're using Chimera paints for this, be careful as they can be quite intense and alter the colour sometimes a lot faster than you might have intended. So make sure to test the glaze out on your thumbnail to see how intense it is before applying it to the model. Do this over a few layers, stopping when you like the effect. It's really up to you how subtle or intense you want to make this. I'm happy to stop there, I think. We can always come back later if we feel it needs a bit more work. Alright troops, so that is how I painted this little face. I hope you found some things that you can try out in your own models. Thanks again. Bye for now. Ow. Oh yeah. My jaw's dislocated. That's not good.